So in my presentation, it's more like an invitation to think of social media and populism, maybe in new terms, and I will explain that later. And I hope that my presentation will be more, let's say, food for thought, like to think in new terms, like the relation of social media and digital technologies in general in the area of populism, in which I would like to think about it not simply as only a pathological phenomena, but maybe a symptom of a society that is very much fragmented, and due to that, it can go anywhere, right wing, left wing, anything. So that's more my kind of ontological idea, is that there is no essentialism, and we would go, in different ways, like this was felt now. So I'm thankful to Dominique, Larissa, and Patrick, and also the EUT, and especially Schader Stiftung. This is a great building. I saw it before in pictures, and I was saying, that's very good. So in my presentation, I'm looking at social media not only as the way that we talk generally about it in the last maybe 15 years. When we talk about populism, we link it to, like, one of the main explanations of the rise of populism is social media. So we talk about social media as one of the tools of disinformation, emotional polarization, and so on. But here I'm just taking this very simple idea of Siegler of the pharmacon. So the pharmacon is an idea that Siegler takes from Derrida, Derrida takes it from Plato, and so on. What is the pharmacon? It's like when you go to the pharmacy and you see apotheker, and there is a glass, and on the glass there is a snake. So basically, because it's a poison, but a poison that heals you. That's how technologies can be. They can be both ways. It's a pharmacon. So when you say pharmacological nature, it's when the good and the bad side are kind of interlinked. Yeah. So for me, I would like also to look at populism in the same way. In the same way as, for example, suggested by many philosophers now, such as, for instance, Ernesto Laclau, Chantal Mouffe, Jacques Rancière, and so on. So populism doesn't refer only to a polarized society, but actually to those moments of creating popular identities that are different from what we have at the moment. So those very weird antagonistic moments of creating new popular narratives, that's populism. In Europe, because of the European specificity, history, and so on, we usually link populism to the right-wing ideologies. But for example, Ernesto Laclau, who comes from South America, he studied populism at the beginning in the case of Peronism in Argentina. And you know, of course, Cuba and Venezuela and so on. So populism was more a source of liberating movement. So populismo wasn't something bad, but on the opposite, it was a kind of popular, revolution against an elite system of domination and so on. So also in populism, I think we can see these both sides of the pharmacon. And I know this idea, you could very much disagree with it, but I'm very happy to learn about the limits of what I'm saying. Okay, so the other point is that Bernard Stiegler also talks about another point, which is entropy. So entropy, you know, is a word from physics, from thermodynamics, and it basically means that systems in general, at some point, they go through disorder. So they kind of collapse. I'm not a physicist. Believe me, I can't argue how that happens, but I know, for example, that Earth at some point will explode and so on. That's very sad. So for Stiegler, that's the same with the epistemological systems and techniques. Example, in the case of social media, what happens with social media is that you can see we go more and more to oversimplified information, to more polarization, to less attention. Simple example, we started with Facebook, at least my generation. I mean, Facebook, for what's going on now, is something very smart. From Facebook, we went maybe to Instagram, and from Instagram to TikTok. So the oversimplification of information, if you want. Maybe you can call that something in the sense of entropy. So the same, I think, so what Stiegler proposes all the time is that he talks about negantropy, so the negation of the entropy, so the negation of this going, of this, let's say, this path to disorder. So, and for him, we can do that through the participation in knowledge production, which offers ways out. So, for example, developing forms of social media that are no more, for example, looking at the users as only data sources. So once you accept the terms and conditions, you become basically a source of information for, let's say, advertisements and so on. So we should create other social media that would work in other terms. And the same thing I wanted to say about populism is that, of course, like populism as it is now, this is like the, I don't want to use the zeitgeist, I don't know, it's like that what's dominant now, this populism is mainly right-wing and it is disruptive, but maybe we could use those same mechanisms, for example, of, let's say, of populism also to create new imaginaries. To express protest against many elements, against the order that is now, which is not only populist, but even not only right-wing populist, but even before it was a political and economic system which was not fine. Call it neoliberalism, call it market economy, whatever you want, but something like that, that not only right-wing populists didn't like, but a lot of people didn't like, and that impacted the lives of many. So basically what I'm saying is that we could look at populism in better words, not only as reductive, not only as entropic, but maybe also in negantropic ways. So we suggest new popular and democratic solutions to our world. Yeah. And then the other idea is that, so that's what I'm saying, for example, that we look at social media and populism not only, yes, as maybe problems, but not only simple problems, but symptoms of our, let's say, ontological and political situation, that there is always a contingency, a lack, and antagonism, and that by populism and social media, they remind us that we need to stay always active and always take action because there is no sort of determinism that where we would go, but they are more inviting us for continuous action. Now I'm totally out of my text, which I have written, so I have to get back to what I wrote. So what if we treated both social media and populism as diagnosis tools, symptoms of a larger social malaise? Yes, but also potential laboratories for transformation. What if instead of rejecting these phenomena, populism and the uses of social media, we learn how to engage with them in a pharmacological way, as I tried to explain at the beginning of my presentation. So they are not only poisons, but also remedies. For example, imagine social media networks that are not rewarding what is most viral, but what is thoughtful. And I know that Patrick maybe would have something to say about this because that's part of his research. So it's basically an invitation to think about platforms that are not intensifying resentment, but instead they invite to cultivate the savoir-faire and savoir-vivre, which is basically the practical and ethical know-how of living together. In an age of populism, I think that this is very much needed. So one of the key insights of Stiegler's work is that digital technologies, and especially algorithms, are not inherently good or bad, but they are pharmacological. The same mechanism that feed algorithmic populism can actually also be used to support epistemic growth. And today, as platforms optimize the retention of engagement, they exploit our emotional vulnerability. But what if algorithms were instead designed to expand our capacity for thought and to slow down and to reflect and learn? This might sound as a technological fantasy, but Stiegler himself, he tried something similar in a project called Pleine Commune, which was in Saint-Denis, where Stiegler works with his collaborators basically on such vision, which is creating a local contributive and digital economy that values participation, care, territorial intelligence. At the heart of this project, what was is this idea of noetic society, which is basically a society of thinking beings which are not only consuming knowledge, but they are also co-producers. This noetic life depends on our ability to resist the entropy of global platform capitalism and constructing territories of contributive knowledge. In such society, for example, the smartphone is not a simple device of capture, but a potential interface for collective thought. Social media becomes not a battleground for attention, but a place for epistemic experimentation. But I think that to take this shift, we must also challenge the economic and institutional structures of our society. So I'm aware of all the economic challenges that are when we want to make changes. And here, of course, I'm thinking about platform capitalism, which, as we know, thrives on data extraction and emotional capture. And it has a sort of, you would say, quantification, not individuation. So individuation as the idea of bringing, going from different segments towards one subjectivity. Basically, my main idea is that the link between populism and social media is not a fatality, in the way of going only to disastrous future of dictatorships and neoconservatism, for example. But we can also break this situation by having a pharmacological critique of our situation. We must design digital spaces that cultivate and not degrade the conditions of our thinking. And that's what EpisTEAM is about. So as a conclusion, what I wanted to present is that there's not a crisis in our use of social media only or of how we look at populism, but there is a crisis of political action. This crisis is also not only epistemological, it's as I said, it is a political one. If we are to recover from the systemic and democratic uses of social media, we have to address not only its negative side, but also its positive and democratic potential. And this is one of the aspects that the EpisTEAM project looks at, and it tries to develop alternative solutions to a situation in which technologies are more and more used in an entropic sense. So I hope that my presentation was a good introduction to the thematic of the conference, and I hope there will be nice questions as well. Yeah, thank you.